20 years ago, there was one piece of advice that every new One Piece reader got handed like it's gospel. When you get to Skypiea, you can skip it. The Cloud Island, the filler in the sky, the 66-chapter detour, where a man with a drum on his back declares himself God, and a bunch of people fight over dirt. You've heard it. Maybe you even believed it. Here's the problem. Right now, in 2026, Oda is sitting in the Elbaf arc, dropping the biggest lore bombs of the series so far. The sun god Nika confirmed to be real. The world destroyed not once, but twice. An ancient people who came down from the moon. False gods demanding worship while the truth gets buried underneath them. And every single one of those reveals, Oda drew the outline back in Skypiea. The arc you skipped wasn't a detour, it was a dress rehearsal for the ending. So today, we're breaking down how the most dismissed arc in One Piece secretly became the blueprint for the final saga. And we're going to end on the part nobody talks about, because 3 characters in that arc, a megalomaniac, a fanatic, and a washed-up old man, said things everyone laughed at, and Oda spent the next 2 decades proving them right. Let's go to the sky. Let's be fair about why people skip it, because the reputation didn't come from nowhere. You've just come off Alabasta, huge stakes, a kingdom on the brink, a warlord pulling strings, real emotional weight, and then the Straw Hats get launched into the sky by a column of water and land in a place with floating dials, sky sharks, and a religion built around a guy named Enel. On a first read, it feels like Oda hit a side quest button and forgot to hit it again for hundreds of pages. But watch what's actually happening underneath the dials and the cloud surfing. Up to this point, the lost history is a rumor. Robin carries it like a private wound, but the reader barely understands what's at stake. Then the Straw Hats reach the ruins of Shandora, a city that stood more than 1,000 years ago, and Robin finds a poneglyph that nobody has been able to read for centuries, and she reads it. It points to Poseidon, one of the ancient weapons, named after a god, with its whereabouts written in stone. Sit with that. The first concrete piece of the world's most dangerous secret doesn't show up in Marineford. It shows up in the arc you were told to skip. And then Oda does the thing that should have made every reader sit up straight. As Robin is walking away, disappointed, a Shandian points out writing she missed, carved into the side of the golden bell. She reads it, and it's a name. Gol D. Roger. The Pirate King stood right here. He left a message saying he'd carry this text to the very ends of the earth, that no storm would stop him. Roger, in the sky, reading a language that's been erased from the world, leaving a note for whoever came next. So here's a question that should have broken the fandom in 2004. How did the King of the Pirates read an ancient script that only the scholars of Ohara and one buried bloodline could decipher? I mean, it's not like we knew about Odin joining Roger back then. Ganfall gives Robin the answer, almost in passing. Roger couldn't actually read the letters. He could hear the voice of all things. That single line, dropped in the arc, is one of the most important sentences in the series. The voice of all things becomes central to Roger, to Odin, to Momonosuke, to the Sea Kings, to Luffy himself. Oda introduced his most mystical power of the world concept in the arc. Everyone tells you to fast forward. That's the first mini payoff, and it sets the pattern for everything else. It's actually Oda calmly handing you the keys to the mystery and trusting you won't notice. Walk through it with me, but this time, swap the names. You've got a people whose homeland was stolen and whose history was erased. The Shandians ripped off their island by the knock-up stream and then chased out of the sky, fighting a 400-year war to reclaim a city the world forgot existed. Replace Shandia with the people of the lost ancient kingdom, and you've got the Void Century. You've got a ruler who literally calls himself God, who demands absolute obedience, who decides who lives and who dies on a whim, and who sits at the top looking down on everyone beneath him. That's Enel. Now look at Marijua, at the celestial dragons who call themselves gods, at Imu, sitting on an empty throne above everyone. Enel was the trial run for the real tyrants. And then you've got the Liberator, someone who shows up immune to the false god's power. Enel's lightning does nothing to Luffy's rubber body, and that immunity drives Enel insane. Because a god that can't smite you isn't a god at all. Hold that thought, because the natural enemy of God becomes the literal description of what Luffy is in the final saga. The Liberator's job in Skypiea: ring the bell, make the buried truth heard again, end the war that erasure started. That is the plot of One Piece. Oda staged the thematic skeleton of his ending: suppressed history, a false god, a 4-century lie. and a liberator who wrings the truth back into the world, and dressed it up as a cloud adventure so you'd treat it like a snack between real meals. And he hid the power system in there too. Remember Mantra? The mysterious Sky Island sixth sense that let Enel and his priests sense you coming from across the island, predict your moves, read the battlefield like they were omniscient. At the time, it felt like local magic. It's observation haki. Oda introduced a core branch of the most important power system in the series, and disguised it as a regional religion's party trick. Isa, a little kid, was using advanced observation haki years before Rayleigh ever said the word. Now look at the single most insane detail. During the celebration in the upper yard, there's a panel of Luffy dancing around a bonfire with the Shandia, arms loose, limbs bent in that fluid, rubbery way, silhouetted against the flames. Hold that silhouette next to the silhouette of sun god Nika that Oda finally revealed in Wano. Same pose, same joy, same drums. Oda drew Luffy as Nika mid-liberation, mid-celebration, roughly 700 chapters before he told you Nika existed in the arc you skipped. And this is the part that should make your jaw drop in 2026 specifically, because everything I just described, false god worship, a buried people, inherited will, the drums, the liberation dance, that's not old news anymore. That's the Elbaf arc happening right now. The giants have murals from the Void Century confirming Nika was real. They worship him as the sun god who brings either liberation or destruction. The drums of liberation are echoing across the page again. Oda is paying off, in the current chapters, the exact concepts he sketched in the sky 2 decades ago. And hey, quick thing, see that little subscribe button down there? Think of it as your own personal golden bell, except instead of proving a lost city of gold exists, ringing it just proves to the algorithm that my videos deserve to survive. Thanks. Okay, so the main arc is a blueprint, but the deepest cut, the thing that aged the strangest, happened after the arc ended, in the cover story. After Skypiea, Oda ran a side comic on the chapter title pages called Enel's Great Space Operations, and it is, on the surface, the most ridiculous thing in the series. Enel, the defeated villain, flies his ark to the moon, fights space pirates, and reawakens a city full of little robots. Space pirates, robots, the moon. For years, the fandom filed this under Oda goofing off between arcs, a Saturday morning cartoon interlude. Half the community decided it was barely canon, and definitely irrelevant. On the moon, Enel finds an ancient city called Birka, and murals on its walls reveal the history of the Sky People. The Skypeans, the Shandians, and the Birkans all originally came from the moon. They were a single people who built a highly advanced civilization up there, ran out of resources, and migrated down to the blue planet, leaving their machines behind. Enel pours his lightning into those dormant machines and brings an army of ancient automata back to life. Ancient robots, a lost, advanced civilization, a people forced to abandon their home and scatter across the world. Does any of that sound familiar after Egghead? Because on Egghead, Vegapunk shows us Emmet, the Iron Giant, a robot built around the time of the Void Century, a friend of Joy Boy, powered by an ancient energy that the smartest man alive could not replicate, a machine so far beyond its era that it climbed the Red Line and marched on Marijua. The exact concept Oda planted as a punchline on the moon, ancient automata from a lost civilization, comes back as load-bearing final saga lore, and it goes deeper. Vegapunk's obsession was building an undying flame, an artificial sun, the mother flame, to give the world free energy. Now connect that to what Elbaf is telling us right now, that Nika, the sun god, traces back to a world where humanity touched the sun for power, and that the Sky People came down from the moon when their resources ran dry. The sun, the moon, the lost energy, the scattered people, Skypiea and its goofy moon cover story were sketching the cosmology of the world. So that filler detour gave you a poneglyph reveal, the first hint of the voice of all things, the disguised debut of observation haki, the Nika silhouette and the lunar origin of an ancient civilization that ties straight into Egghead and Elbaf. That's an arc carrying half the series on its back. Which brings us to my favourite part, and the thing almost nobody gives this arc credit for. Skypiea has 3 characters that the story and the audience basically wrote off. A megalomaniac who thinks he's a god, a warrior so consumed by an old war that he'll burn down everything to win it, and a tired old man whose time as ruler is over, a lunatic, a fanatic, and a has-been. And Oda spent 20 years proving that all 3 of them were right about something. Start with the old man, Ganfall. Ganfall is the former god of Skypiea, the legitimate one, before Enel took the title by force. And all through the arc, he keeps saying the same uncomfortable thing. This 400-year war over the upper yard is hollow. The bloodshed is built on a misunderstanding. The land everyone's killing for has a history deeper than any of the people fighting over it understand, and the fighting can actually end. Everyone treats him like a relic clinging to old ideals. But he's right on every count. The war does end. The Shandia and Skypeans reconcile the moment they learn the truth. And here's the structural genius. Ganfall is the humble, true authority who was shoved aside by a loud, false god who demanded worship. That's not just Skypiea's story. That's the spine of the final saga. Real history and legitimate freedom buried under self-proclaimed gods. Ganfall was the first character to look at a false god and know the difference. He's also, remember, the one who casually tells Robin that Roger could hear the voice of all things. The washed-up old man was holding one of the keys. Now, the fanatic, Wiper. Wiper is the descendant of Kalgara, and he is impossible to reason with. He'll use a reject dial that could stop his own heart. He fights the Straw Hats, his own allies, anyone in the way. Everything in him is bent toward one goal: reclaim Shandora and ring the bell, so the world hears that his people existed. To a casual viewer, he's a zealot wasting his life on a centuries-old grudge. But what is Wiper actually fighting for? He's fighting to keep his people's history from being erased, and to make a silenced truth ring out loud enough that the world can't ignore it. The bell was built to say 3 words across the centuries: "We are here." Wiper is right that it matters, because that is the central thesis of One Piece. The truth can be buried for 400 years, a city can be erased, a people can be scattered, and still the bell rings. Inherited will outlasts erasure, and in the current saga, that's exactly what the heroes are doing on a global scale. Vegapunk's broadcast, the Giants' murals, the lost history clawing its way back into the light. Wiper was just the first person willing to die to make the truth audible. And now, the lunatic, Enel. Enel is a narcissist, a tyrant, a guy who electrocutes children and plans to obliterate an entire island because the idea of people existing beneath him offends him. Nobody's redeeming Enel. But here's what everyone laughed at. Enel was obsessed with a place he called the Fairy Verth, the Endless Land. He insisted it was real, that it was the land of God, and he built an ark to fly there, while the rest of the cast treated it as the delusion of a madman. Then he flew to the moon, and the Endless Land was real. The moon really held the ancestral home of his people, a lost civilization, an ancient city. The madman flew toward the truth and landed on it, and it cuts deeper than that. Enel's worldview was that the land itself, the soil, the verth, the ground you can stand on and survive on, is the ultimate prize, worth more than gold. Everyone in Skypiea thought he was insane for valuing dirt over treasure. Now look at the final saga. The world is sinking. Vegapunk has told us the seas are rising, and habitable land is about to become the most fought-over resource on the planet. The Revolutionary Army is literally preparing for a coming war over livable ground. The man who said, "The land is everything, gold is nothing," wasn't raving, he was early. 3 characters, a false god, a fanatic, and a relic. And Oda quietly made all 3 of them prophets. Now, does this mean Enel comes back to play a role in the endgame? That part's still firmly fan theory, so I'm not going to sell it to you as fact. But the things these 3 believed, those weren't theory. Oda put them in canon, 20 years apart. So do this. Go back and reread Skypiea, not as filler, as the first draft of the finale. And when you spot the next thing Oda's hiding in plain sight, drop it in the comments. As always, thank you for watching, and have a nice one.